the King of Light is the calling of a crystal. Only the true king, anointed by the crystal, can purge our star of its scourge.
Noctis, Lucis, Caelum.
Noctis is an unorthodox character who blends his mixture of Tekken generics with his plethora of unique long-range weapon attacks. Thanks to his excellent whiff and block punishment tools, Noctis can capitalize very hard on any mistake the opponent makes, which is maximized even further thanks to his incredibly dangerous Okizeme and strong wall pressure. When given space to breathe, Noctis is a scary, explosive character in the mid-range, who forces the opponent to play more carefully against him with his annoying poke strings while being able to keep them out due to his long-range tools. With the power of his royal arms, the Lucian Prince will tear down all that their challenges might. Low execution barrier, making him very easy to pick up. An extremely well-rounded block punishment kit, even boasting a long-range 15-frame launch punisher. Many moves have exceptional range, such as Warp Strike, making him able to punish the opponent's whiffs from nearly any distance. A good set of pokes to annoy and chip away at the opponent's life bar. Strong Okizeme, which can lead to some very dangerous setups. Incredibly high combo damage and very flexible wall carry. Strong wall pressure thanks to Emo Man and a variety of wall splatting mids. Lacks a fast plus on block move, making it hard for him to maintain pressure once he loses momentum. Many of Noctis' hard-hitting moves are incredibly unsafe, making him very risky. Doesn't have very good panic moves, making it hard for him to get out of pressure. Extremely vulnerable to being sidestepped, particularly to the right. Outside of combos, Noctis has fairly lackluster ground damage. (1-2) is the start of Noctis' jab strings. For the sake of the punishment section, we'll only be covering 1-2 and 1-2 first, and then the rest of the extensions will be elaborated further in the key moves section. Noctis' 1-2 is generally the recommended punish. The whole string is natural on hit, though unblocked the third hit doesn't jail, and is also unsafe at -11, meaning this should only be used for punishment. While this does fairly high damage for a 10-frame punish, this is only +1 on hit. This means that follow-up jabs are uninterruptible except against high crush moves, but aside from that, the game is basically reset to neutral, meaning both players are pretty much free to do whatever they want afterwards. For significantly less damage, but much more frame advantage, you can simply just use 1-2 instead of the full string, since at +6 on hit, it gives Noctis many more options afterwards to maintain his pressure and momentum. Noctis has a great 12-frame punish in his back 1-2. This is a high damage double high string that grants +7 on hit, with both surprisingly long range and a large vertical hitbox for a high. At +7, a follow-up down back 3, 2-2, or perfectly executed forward 1+2 are all uninterruptible, and can all also be used to dissuade steppers. Once the opponent is more respectful of your frame advantage, or is more reluctant to move laterally, then you can start to use some of Noctis' slow linear moves, such as down back 1+2 or while running 1+2. This is an extremely solid 12-frame punish, though it's not really used for too much else, as the string has basically no tracking, and the second hit is a non-jailing high. Season 4 granted Noctis a powerful new 13-frame punisher in the form of his down forward 1-2. This is a mid that does nice damage and knocks the opponent down for some pretty strong Okizeme afterwards. We'll go further into this move later in the key moves section when we discuss his down forward 1 and warp strike. Back 3-1 is a high damage double mid string that knocks down on normal hit. This is generally the recommended punish at the wall since it wall splats. Due to the opponent being able to back roll afterwards, however, you can't really apply pressure after the knockdown out in the open. If the opponent is asleep at the wheel and doesn't escape with a back roll, Noctis can get a variety of guaranteed follow-ups such as forward 1+2, down back 2, down back 1+2, or an instant while running 1+2 for some extra damage. Noctis possesses one of the most powerful launches in the game in his down forward 2. This is a 15 frame launcher with ridiculous range, making this his go-to with Punisher as well. Due to its exceptional range, this makes Noctis one of the few characters who can very reliably launch punish large pushback moves, such as Demon Uppercut, Death Fist, and ironically, Noctis' own Royal Slash. This move alone is what makes Noctis so dangerous in the mid-range, as whiffing against him means potentially getting launched for a huge combo. Outside of punishment, this move does have a tiny bit of high evasion during its animation, and tracks quite well at tip range. However, this is not recommended to be used as a panic move often, as it is ridiculously punishable on block at -20, making this launch punishable by every character on the roster. Regardless, this remains one of Noctis' strongest moves thanks to its sheer speed, range, and huge damage potential on hit, rendering this as one of the most effective block and whiff punishment tools in the entire game. Forward 1+2 is also a long range block and whiff punisher, similar to down forward 2, albeit much less rewarding. This has subtly more range than down forward 2, meaning if you block a large pushback move shallowly, this can be used instead if you feel down forward 2 might whiff, which would be devastating. If your opponent fails to back roll on hit, you get a guaranteed grounded hit, similar to after back 3-1 on hit as mentioned previously. Aside from that, this move shouldn't really be used outside of punishment, since it is also wildly unsafe on block at -19, though it is a little hard to punish for many characters if blocked at tip range. For crouching punishment, Noctis has a very basic while standing 4 at 11 frames. This is a fast, decently ranged mid that is -6 on block and +5 on hit, making this a completely average while standing 4 that isn't anything too special. Noctis has a very good 13 frame punish from crouch in his while standing 1-2. This is a high damage double mid string with surprisingly good range, and forces crouch on hit at +2, making a follow-up down forward 1 trade with an opponent's while standing 4. And is also unsteppable if the opponent is on the player 1 side. Aside from punishment, this string is also extremely delayable, though if fully delayed, it will no longer be natural except on counter hit, where it is counter hit confirmable even to maximum delay, similar to Steve's while standing 1-2. This means that while standing 1 by itself, thanks to its range and fear of the second hit, is a pretty decent mid poke as well from crouch. If the opponent happens to be pressing buttons, and only the second hit lands as a counter hit however, a follow-up down back 2 or down back 1+2 is completely guaranteed for a nice chunk of damage. Do be careful though, as on block the second hit is -13. Noctis' launcher from crouch is his while standing 2-2, a double mid string that immediately puts the opponent in a screw state. As a 15 frame crouching block punisher, this isn't anything too special, but aside of punishment, this can be used as a high risk high reward option from Noctis' full crouch mix-up, since the first hit tracks very well to both sides. However, you have to let the string rip to get the full combo, since this is not delayable or hit confirmable at all, meaning if it gets blocked, you risk getting punished very heavily at -14, depending on the matchup of course. If the second hit somehow lands by itself, it gives massive frame advantage with ballerina stun, and also launches on counter hit to dissuade trigger happy opponents. Finally, at 16 frames, Noctis has his full crouch down forward 1. This is only specifically to punish launch punishable lows when the opponent has their back to the wall, since while standing 2-2 doesn't splat due to the first hit already putting the opponent in an airborne state. Thus, using full crouch down forward 1 instead maximizes your damage potential when at the wall, since it allows you to get a walk combo or potentially an off-axis combo. We will get further into this move later when we discuss it again in the key moves and game plan sections when explaining his full crouch mix-up. Noctis' primary mid poke at close range is his down forward 1. This is a fast 13 frame mid with decent range and gives you a nice +7 on hit to work with to enforce his pressure. If down forward 1 connects, you can use forward 1 +2, 2-2, or down back 3, all of which cannot be stepped or interrupted. If your opponent respects your frame advantage, you can then use slower moves like an instant wall running 1 +2 to get more plus frames, or a demo man for a nice chunk of damage. On block, this is -1, which means both Noctis and the opponent are pretty much free to move around or retaliate with moves afterwards. Though do take note that the opponents will be able to interrupt anything except high crush moves with a follow-up jab. This can be stepped fairly easily to the right, which is Noctis' weak side. This move has an extension in down forward 1-4, which is only a natural combo on counter hit if it's not fully delayed. Due to this delayable extension, this is extremely useful as a frame trap or against opponents who tend to press buttons after down forward 1 on block, especially at the wall since this wall splats. However, be careful as the second hit is a high, so opponents can duck and launch this if used predictably, and can also be fully evaded with a sidewalk to the right. Down forward 1-2, as mentioned in the punishment section, is a new Season 4 addition. Unfortunately, the second hit is a special mid, meaning the opponent can block it both standing and crouching. This makes it not really usable as a mix-up option with down forward 1-4, though it is significantly lower risk and also cannot be stepped, thus can be used occasionally if you have a good read on your opponent's tendencies. Noctis' jab is pretty normal in terms of frame data at +1 on block and +8 on hit, though it has pretty decent range and a very low vertical hitbox, making him one of the best characters to do dash jab combos with. His 1-2 is also pretty generic compared to other 1-2 strings as a natural jailing string at -2 on block and +6 on hit. From here on out, he has several extensions which serve different purposes. Since 1-2-2 was already covered in the punishment section, and punishment is its primary use case, we will not be going over it again. 1-2-3 and 1-2-4 are Noctis' side dodges. 1-2-3 makes Noctis warp to the left, while 1-2-4 goes to the right. This kind of acts as a baked-in sidestep after the 1-2 string, after which Noctis recovers in crouch, giving him access to his while standing and full crouch moves. This maneuver is mainly useful against opponents who tend to press buttons after 1-2 on block, since he basically takes a huge sidestep afterwards, giving him the opportunity to punish reckless retaliation. However, this is also extremely risky, as it is incredibly punishable even on hit, and also will lose to homing moves or moves that specifically track towards the warp direction, making this incredibly situational. 1-2 1 +2 is quite similar to his down forward 1 +2. This is a knockdown and wall splatting mid that is also safe on block, though it can be interrupted by moves faster than 12 frames. So against opponents who like to jab a lot or characters with 11 frame magic 4s, this may not be as good of an option. It can also be stepped to the left by opponents who anticipate the string. 2-2 is one of the best mids in Noctis' arsenal. This is a double mid string with incredibly good range and is safe on block, allowing you to use it either as an approach tool or as a low risk whiff punisher. This also happens to track decently against sidestep right, which, as mentioned previously, is Noctis' weak side, though it can still be sidestepped to the left. This move's biggest strengths are in its extensions. All extensions are delayable and quite rewarding in their own way. As such, 2-2 can sometimes be used for mental frame advantage if you notice your opponent freezing up in fear of the extensions, depending on how well conditioned they are. The first extension is the entire 2 string. The rest of the string is uninterruptible if not delayed, and is completely natural if the third hit connects, after which the rest of the string can also be hit confirmed. The third hit is a high, meaning this can be ducked and launched, however this is somewhat covered by the fourth hit, which will often snuff out punishment attempts due to its sheer speed. Though characters with good high crush moves from crouch, like Julia's bow and arrow or Brian's northern cross, are pretty good counters against this. If the opponent doesn't duck the third hit, the fourth cannot be ducked since it jails, and both of them are safe on block as well. The fifth and final hit is a knockdown mid, which grants a guaranteed grounded hit such as down 1, down back 3, or down 2. But be careful, as this is -14 on block, so only use this if you hit confirm the string, or are confident that your opponent will push buttons after blocking the fourth hit. The second extension is 2-2 forward 2. Just like 2-2-2, this cannot be interrupted when not delayed. This covers the danger of the previous extensions getting ducked, since the third hit is a mid. On hit, this causes ballerina stun with 5 frames of advantage, Wallsplats, and launches on counter hit against opponents who try to retaliate after blocking 2-2, making this potentially very rewarding. However, it is also risky, as at -14 on block, this can be heavily punished depending on the matchup. The final extension is 2-2 back 2. This is a special mid that grants a knockdown similar to his forward 2. This can catch interrupt attempts after 2-2, however it is very linear and slightly unsafe on block at -11. This is generally used as an ender in combos since this gives Noctis some incredibly strong Okizeme. Down forward 4 is one of Noctis' most underrated mid pokes. The second hit is extremely delayable and remains natural even to maximum delay, while granting huge frame advantage at +8 to apply up close pressure. This can also be used as an alternate 14 frame punisher to back 3-1 if you need a mid or simply want the frame advantage instead of the knockdown. The second hit is a high, meaning it can be ducked, though it actually recovers surprisingly fast, making it nearly impossible to launch punish on reaction in an actual match, except against those with fast while standing launchers. Just like many of Noctis' moves, this can be stepped to the right fairly easily. Down forward 4-2 has 2 extensions, though neither are really too useful in the neutral since they can both be stepped fairly easily. Down forward 4-2-4 is a high that is primarily used as a screw move, though the last hit is natural if the first hit lands as a counter hit without delaying the string at all, or if the second hit lands as a counter hit alone, making this somewhat usable at the wall for a Wallsplat. Down forward 4-2-2 is a safe mid orbital that grants a full combo on hit. However, this is extremely slow and easily stepped to the left. Down back 1 is a fairly unique poke. This is a fast mid that grants +3 on hit and can be stepped to the right. From there, you can choose either to hold forward to transition into roll dodge, which we'll get into later, or simply finish the full string, down back 1/1+2. The roll dodge transition should only be used for Okizeme setups, as using it in the open on block leaves you completely vulnerable to mids and lows for roughly 20 frames, though roll dodge 1 will armor through mids. Down back 1/1+2 is slightly delayable and gives more frame advantage on hit, and is also perfectly safe at -5 on block, which allows for some parry setups against opponents who try to retaliate right afterwards. This is mainly used as a wall combo ender and as an Okizeme tool since this picks up grounded opponents for a float combo by converting with down 2-2, which is also useful for punishing moves that recover in low stances, such as Eddie's back 3-3. Due to this being much more rewarding and slightly less negative on block, it is pretty much always in your favor to just finish the full string, aside from specific Okizeme situations. Back 2 is a 14 frame mid that is barely safe on block and has a just frame extension in back 2 1+2 that gives more damage and leaves Noctis at +6. The just frame timing isn't too tight, so simply mashing 1+2 when the back 2 connects is an easy way to reliably get the extension to come out. While back 2 is safe on block, at -9 your turn is effectively over, opening you up to getting pressured, especially since the extension will never come out if back 2 is blocked, meaning the opponent never has to fear for the second hit. As such, this move is a little situational. Forward 1+2 is easily Noctis' best move. This covers many aspects of Noctis' game plan, as it is his main approach tool, homing move, and counter hit launcher all in one package. This is a fast, safe on block mid with great range, which can be further extended by holding your dash before inputting the 1+2. On hit, this causes ballerina stun for huge frame advantage, giving you a standing mix-up between mids like another forward 1+2 again, or down back 1+2, and lows like down 2 or demo man. This also wall splats, making this a great low risk option for wall pressure since it is safe on block. On counter hit, this puts the opponent into an immediate screw state for a full combo, and also screws if you catch an opponent out of mid-air for a float combo. As his primary homing move, this is Noctis' main tool in the neutral to dissuade opponents from sidestepping him. This, in turn, allows you to use many of Noctis' other moves since many of them can be stepped to the right or are just downright linear after the opponent has been conditioned to stand still. This move is practically the complete package, though at -9 on block, remember that you basically give up your turn and open yourself up to a mix-up afterwards, so once the opponent is more hesitant to step, start using Noctis' other moves like wall running 1+2 as approach tools instead, then constantly alternate and adapt depending on what your opponent's movement tendencies are. Up forward 4 is Noctis' other primary homing move. On hit, this knocks down, granting guaranteed follow-ups in down back 2, down back 1+2, or with some execution, even a microdash or small sidestep left into down 2 for a full combo. If the opponent has their wall to the right, the microdash is not needed for the down 2 pickup, making this move far more dangerous in that position. This also low crushes, making it useful against lows that do not high crush. At -3 on block, this gives Noctis far more flexibility to move around or retaliate afterwards compared to forward 1+2. However, this is a high, meaning it can be ducked and launched if predicted, so make sure to mix this up with forward 1+2 to keep your opponent honest and on their toes. 1+2 is a pretty situational move. This is a high mid homing move that knocks down and wall splats. This also launches on counter hit, though at -14 on block, Noctis' other homing moves are just simply so much better that it's almost never worth using this move over those previously mentioned. You can also cancel the second hit by holding 1+2 back, but this makes you lose the counter hit launch property, as well as leaving Noctis at -3 on hit instead. This move is more often used as a combo ender for short wall carry. Noctis' Royal Slash, also known as the infamous, is a high damage class 1 launcher with ridiculous range, being able to hit from a little further than range 3. While this is -16 on block, the pushback makes punishing this a little awkward depending on the matchup, as it requires the opponent's character to have a long range punish. Ironically, Noctis' own down forward 2 and forward 1+2 are some of the best punishers against this move. However, if spaced correctly, this move becomes completely unpunishable, since the pushback will simply be too far for any move to reach. Thus, this should be used with some spacing as often as possible to make this safe against every character on the roster. On hit, this launches the opponent up high and can be followed up with a down forward 1+2 for a huge combo. This is also one of Noctis' main moves to hit grounded, since it consistently hits opponents who remain on the floor regardless of the axis. While this is an extremely dangerous and powerful move, it is incredibly slow, making it susceptible to getting counter hit and has nearly no tracking, meaning even the smallest sidestep will avoid it and recovers extremely slowly on whiff. As such, make sure to condition your opponent to stand still with fast moves like 2-2 combined with homing moves like forward 1+2. You can also charge up this move by holding down on the 1+2 input. This makes the move plus on block. However, this isn't really useful since it makes the move significantly slower than it already is, and the frame advantage still doesn't really matter due to the pushback, except at the wall. While running 1+2 is one of Noctis' few offensive tools. At a massive +11 on block, this gives Noctis many options to work with, such as a follow-up forward 1+2 as a frame trap and to dissuade steppers, or simply the running 1+2 again to maintain his offensive position. This also has pretty ridiculous range, as the hitbox extends completely to the end of Noctis' blade, and low crushes, making this a decent option to beat low getup kicks. On hit, this grants a full combo, making this incredibly devastating to get hit by. Just like down back 1+2, this move is also very slow and linear. This will also consistently hit grounded opponents. While this is a very strong move, its slow speed and linearity means you should only start using this move once the opponent has been conditioned to stay still, similar to down back 1+2's use case. Up forward 3 is Noctis' hop kick. This is his primary panic move that launches on normal hit, and crushes lows during its animation. While it is decently fast, it has pretty poor range, is -13 on block, and has practically no tracking, making this pretty weak for a panic move. This move is also often used as combo filler, as you can transition into jump by holding up or up forward on hit. Overall, this move should be used very carefully outside of combos due to its sheer risk. Up forward 2 is Noctis' orbital. This move has ridiculous range and launches on normal hit. Unfortunately, this is also incredibly slow, even slower than most other orbitals in the game, making it very easy to get floated out of. It is also very linear as expected, and on block, while it does force the opponent into crouch, it also leaves Noctis at -8, which severely limits his options, and is especially dangerous against characters who have strong full crouch mix-ups. As such, this move should be used very sparingly. Backturn 2 is Noctis' only special move from Backturned. This is a safe mid-launcher that can be easily converted into a combo with down 2-2. Unfortunately, you'll probably rarely use this move, since Noctis doesn't really have great ways of getting into Backturned in the first place. However, since this is safe on block, it's not too risky to throw out once in back turned. Just beware that it is a little slow and quite linear. For crouch down forward 1 is a safe on block mid with decent range that both knocks down and wall splats. It is Noctis' primary wall splatting tool alongside forward 1+2. This can be used to be mixed up with full crouch down forward 2 and is especially strong at the wall due to it being able to wall splat from a decent distance away. This also beats sidestep right, though a clean sidewalk will still avoid it, and offers no tracking to the other direction. While this is -9 on block, the pushback does help set up certain whiff traps for opponents who recklessly retaliate afterwards, allowing you to sometimes be able to retain your turn by making the opponent more hesitant to retaliate. This is a fantastic move at the wall and complements full crouch down forward 2 incredibly well, which in itself is an amazing low from Noctis' full crouch that we'll get into later. Forward 2 is Noctis' other main wall splatting tool at the wall. This is a natural double mid string that knocks down on open ground as well. This is mainly used as a mid wall splat option after a wall combo, or as a decent whiff punisher if the opponent has their back against the wall, since it wall splats from a further distance than forward 1+2. However, this is slightly unsafe on block at -11, and on block, the second hit can be interrupted by any move faster than 14 frames. Just like with Noctis' other moves, this is fairly linear and can be stepped in either direction. Since this move cannot be delayed or hit confirmed, try to use it only as a whiff punisher, or mix up using only the first hit and the full string to keep the opponent on their toes. Down forward 1+2 is a safe, long-range mid that knocks down and wall splats on hit. This is particularly useful when the opponent has their back to the wall due to its massive range. While it is -9 on block, it also has large pushback, making this somewhat useful to reset the neutral as well, especially if the opponent blocks this at tip range. At close range, this is quite linear, but at longer ranges it actually has fairly decent tracking and can only be beaten by well-timed sidewalks to either direction. Despite this move has quite a slow startup speed, so it can get snuffed out by fast keep out moves pretty easily. Forward 2, also known as Warp Strike, is one of the best whiff punishers in the game. While it is a little slow at 20 frames, it has insane range, with a maximum range of a little less than range 6, allowing you to use this when down forward 2 cannot reach the opponent. This means that Noctis can actually block punish certain moves that most characters cannot, such as Claudio's forward 2-2 or Kazumi's lunging dinosaur attacks. This move makes whiffing against Noctis incredibly dangerous, as Warp Strike does a nice chunk of damage and puts Noctis in a very favourable position for Okizeme. The knockdown stun is exactly the same with 2-2 back 2, down forward 1-2, while standing 3-2, and forward 3-2, so your options afterwards are exactly the same. Though do note that unlike forward 2, all of these other options are unsafe on block. This can also be used as a way to quickly get up close to your opponent. However, at -9, you basically give up your turn on block. Though this does open up certain parry setups, as an immediate parry will reverse any move the opponent does that is between 12 to 17 frames. Though this is naturally quite a risky move to make, which we will get to when we discuss his parry later. Warp Strike is incredibly linear, and even the slightest lateral movement will basically make it whiff. How well the opponent can punish Noctis afterwards, however, is largely dependent on the matchup, distance between the characters, and how the opponent stepped. For example, Noctis can occasionally get lucky and sometimes end up quite far away from the opponent, making the opponent whiff their punish. Though characters with long-range punishers like Hwoarang's back 3 or Noctis' own down forward 2 will basically nullify this. However, in most cases, many characters should be able to get a punish in on a whiffed forward 2. Warp Strike is a special mid, meaning that it doesn't matter whether the opponent is standing or crouching, as both ways they will be able to block it. This goes for every variation of Warp Strike, so they cannot be used as mix-up options from their strings. Warp Strike should primarily be used as a whiff punisher, or as an approach tool if you are confident your opponent will not sidestep it. Sidestep 2 is a decently ranged mid that is neutral on block. This is one of the few moves that doesn't leave him at a frame disadvantage on block, making it a decent neutral tool. Since it is 0 on block, both players are free to move or retaliate, though the opponent is left in crouch. On hit, this gives 5 frames of advantage and forces crouch, limiting their options even more. It also tracks incredibly well against sidestep right, which is Noctis' weak side, though it has nearly no tracking to the other side. On counter hit, this knocks down for a free down back 1+2 or down back 2. However, it is a little slow due to the baked in sidestep frames, making it a little susceptible to getting counter hit if you're not too careful. Up forward 1 is Noctis' fastest counter hit launcher. This is a 13 frame high with pretty decent range and causes a little bit of pushback on block. At +8 on hit, it's pretty rewarding, offering a mix-up between a variety of Noctis' mids and his down back 3. On counter hit, this grants a full combo. This can primarily be used as a keep out tool to dissuade opponents from rushing in, since it kind of acts like a pseudo magic 4. However, this is a high, meaning it can be ducked, and it can also be avoided by, you guessed it, sidestep right. Forward 1+4 is Noctis' Power Crush with armor frames starting up on its 8th frame. This is a mid with pretty large range, that on hit knocks down, guaranteeing a follow-up forward 1+2 for a nice chunk of damage. Like most other mid power crushes however, it is unsafe at -13 on block and is vulnerable to lows, so it should be used carefully. Forward 4, unlike the other moves listed, is specifically used for combos only. This move isn't really useful out in the open since it is slow, unsafe on block, and can be beaten by movement to the right. On hit, this automatically transitions into a side switching throw for huge damage. This is Noctis' highest damage combo ender if you aren't going for the wall, and the position the opponent is left in afterwards provides Noctis with some very threatening setups, which we will cover in the game plan section later. Do note though that you have to be on axis for the throw transition to occur, making this move unsuitable as a combo ender for off-axis or back-turn combos. Noctis' only command throw comes in his back 1+2. This is a average command throw that requires a 1+2 input to break, and isn't anything too special. Down back 3 is Noctis' primary low poke. This is fast and high crushes during its animation. It also has very good tracking, only being avoidable with a well-timed sidewalk to the left, which is the opposite way to sidestep Noctis at close range, making this also a viable option to dissuade stepping. Thanks to its speed and high crushing properties, this is the go-to low for Noctis at close range. However, it has short range, leaves Noctis at -2 on hit, making it hard for him to enforce any pressure afterwards. Though this is slightly mitigated by the threat of his parry. An immediate while standing 4 will trade with the opponent's follow-up down forward 1. If the down back 3 hits at tip range, it becomes -1 instead, meaning a while standing 4 will beat out a down forward 1. If the opponent is more hesitant to retaliate, or tends to attack back with fast highs like jabs, you can use Noctis' full crouch move instead, like full crouch down forward 2, which is a homing plus on hit low that high crushes. However, such options will be beaten out by fast mids, like the aforementioned down forward 1. This is a great load to annoy and chip away at the opponent's life bar, though do be careful as it is -13 on block, meaning it can even be launched by a select few characters. Noctis' Demo Man, more often dubbed as Emo Man, is similar in use case to Paul's Demo Man. This is a 3-hit string, with the first hit starting with a low. The whole string is natural if the first hit lands as a clean hit, meaning this only works at close range, and deals a solid 39 damage. You can hit confirm the last hit by inputting the first 2 hits of the string first, then inputting the last once you see the opponent trip. You pretty much have to do so, as the last hit is -18 and forces crouch, meaning everyone, even Steve, can launch this. While the second hit is also unsafe, it's significantly less risky at -12 on block, and even has some pushback, making it difficult for some characters to punish this outside the wall. The first hit has pretty decent tracking, but can still be beaten by a sidewalk to the right. It is also a little slow with no crushing properties, and staggers on block, making it incredibly risky. This can only be used when you're up in the opponent's face, though very often a single backdash alone will be able to avoid this. So this is best used at the wall, particularly after a wall combo as a low mix-up option. A trick with this move, when your opponent is close to the wall, is to only use the first 2 hits, as it can actually give you a fresh wall splat at the right distance or angle for a full wall combo for huge damage. There is also a just frame version of this by timing the third input, which gives an extra 2 points of damage. The just frame is pretty easy, and the best tips to do it are just to time the input of the third hit once the second connects, or when Noctis makes his sound cue. This is Noctis' most dangerous and damaging low, though do be careful due to its slow speed, weak range, and extremely high risk when blocked. As a side note, this move is a launcher on Forgotten Realm and Cave of Enlightenment since it floor breaks. Down 2 is Noctis' other main low poke aside from down back 3. This is slower than down back 3 and doesn't have any high crushing properties, but has slightly more damage and subtly longer range. It also has similar tracking as down back 3, so it can only be evaded with a well-timed sidewalk left. The biggest strength of this move is that it is neutral on hit, so it gives Noctis a little bit more flexibility afterwards compared to down back 3. This is minus 15 on block, meaning most characters can launch punish this, though this is somewhat covered by the extension down 2-2. The second hit is a high that will automatically screw an opponent on counter hit, making this useful if the first hit is blocked and the opponent attempts to punish it. However, the full string is only a natural combo on counter hit, and since the second hit is a high, it can be ducked and launched if the opponent predicts it. Noctis' only plus on hit low is his fully crouched down forward 2. This is a homing low with pretty decent range, which is useful against people who try to sidestep Noctis when he's in full crouch. On hit, this puts the opponent into crouch and leaves Noctis at plus 4, making a follow-up while standing 1 uninterruptible, which is extremely useful since it is also counter hit confirmable, though this can be sidewalked to the left by opponents on the player 1 side. This is an incredibly strong low, though it is a little slow at 20 frames, making it vulnerable to getting counter hit by fast mids and lows. Down back 2 is Noctis' most infamous low. This is a high damage knockdown low with pretty long range and strong Okizeme on hit. A follow-up forward 1+2 will connect on opponents who try to immediately stand up. At the wall, you get a guaranteed down back 3 or down 2 for a little bonus damage, and on counter hit it gives a different knockdown animation, guaranteeing another down back 2 or down back 1+2. The main issues with this move are its linearity, slow startup speed, and being launch punishable on block and minus 19, meaning every character can launch punish this. Due to its slow speed and fairly obvious sound cue, extremely sharp players can actually see and block this move on reaction, so this move should be used very sparingly and carefully, especially against strong players. Down back 4 is another low poke Noctis has. This is basically a worse version of down back 3, having roughly the same tracking and range, but is slightly slower, does pretty mediocre damage, and crucially, lacks the high crushing properties of down back 3. The only plus side of this move is that it is only minus 12 on block, meaning it cannot be launched by characters with 13 frame punishers from crouch as well, making it useful in those specific matchups. Aside from that, down back 3 should be used over this in nearly every other situation. Noctis does have generic lows in his full crouch 3 and full crouch 4. However, he cannot access directly from standing since those inputs are already taken up by the previously mentioned moves. The lack of a generic down 4 from standing in particular really hurts him, since it is used so often to break the opponent's pressure, and made even more limited since Noctis lacks a down jab from standing as well. Just like other generic full crouch lows, the frame data is pretty much the same, being fairly negative on hit and launch punishable on block. Noctis only has a single stance in his roll dodge. This can either be manually entered by doing forward 3+4 or transitioning into it by holding forward after down back 1. The stance automatically high crushes, though it does leave Noctis completely vulnerable to mids and lows. If Noctis gets interrupted, he can potentially get floated for a combo, since Noctis is considered airborne during the roll. Aside from the roll dodge moves, you can also simply roll into standing or roll into full crouch, the latter of which is done by holding down back afterwards. This is potentially useful if you just want to threaten with the mix-up or to remain safe, as both moves from roll dodge are unsafe and linear. Now let's get into the roll dodge moves, of which there are only 2. Roll dodge 1 is a mid power crush that knocks down on open ground and causes a wall bounce. Due to its power crush property, this is useful against people who try to interrupt the roll mix-up, and is especially dangerous at the wall due to the wall bounce leading to big damage. But be careful, as the move can be sidewalked to either direction and is also unsafe at minus 13 on block. Roll dodge 3+4 is the low option out of the stance. This is a slide that knocks down on normal hit and guarantees a down back 1+2 for extra damage. While this is decently rewarding, it has nearly no tracking and is incredibly unsafe on block at minus 20, making it launch punishable by everyone, so this should be used carefully. Noctis has 2 different parries, both of which do different things and serve different purposes. Back 1+4 is Noctis' Sabaki. This is a slow mid with built-in parry frames specifically against punches. Without reversing anything, this gives 4 frames of advantage and leaves the opponent in crouch. when timed correctly upon a successful parry, it knocks the opponent down, giving a guaranteed down back 1+2. This is somewhat useful against jab or poke heavy characters like Steve or Kazumi, though do note that the move itself is quite slow and can be stepped very easily to the right. Noctis' more universal parry, back 1+3 or back 2+4, is a fast reversal that comes out in 3 frames and has a 7-frame parry window. Upon a successful reversal, this will knock the opponent down with a nice 30 damage, and if you are close to the wall, even gives a free wall combo. This parry can also be done directly from crouch, making this useful for moves that force Noctis into crouch on block, thus occasionally being able to break away from pressure. However, this parry should be used extremely carefully, as it suffers from incredibly poor whiff recovery, meaning your opponent can easily launch punish you on reaction, making this a very risky option if the opponent is more patient or defensive. Finally, for the last key moves, Noctis has his Rage Art and Rage Drive. Noctis' Rage Art is for the most part nothing special. This is a 20 frame mid with armor frames that start up on its 8th frame, and transitions into a high damage cinematic attack on hit. The only slightly unique thing about this Rage Art is its above average range, making this a very good whiff punisher, as well as working even in long combos. However, use this only when you think it will connect, as it is a whopping -32 on block. Noctis' Rage Drive is basically an upgraded version of his Warp Strike. It has pretty much the same range and tracking, though it is slightly faster by 2 frames. On block, this is +2 and leaves Noctis fairly close to the opponent. If the opponent hits the wall due to the large pushback, they take a guaranteed 5 points of damage and Noctis is left at +8 instead, allowing him to enforce his wall pressure. On hit, this flings the opponent extremely far away, and will also cause a wall splat if the wall is within distance. This will also wall splat the opponent during a combo, making this an easy immediate wall splat if you need it, and will even resplat a second time if the opponent has already been carried to the wall. Though this does have a nasty habit of putting Noctis in weird positions, making him unable to continue the combo. Overall, this should generally be used similarly to Warp Strike as a long range whiff punisher. Noctis is a character who focuses on strong punishment with a sprinkle of poke strings to annoy the opponent. Thanks to Noctis' huge range, he excels in the mid-range when he can be given space to breathe, which makes him able to whiff punish very easily, while being able to use his slower, hard-hitting moves like down back 1+2 at the non-punishable range, and down forward 1+2 or while running 1+2, which both gain better tracking at longer ranges. In the neutral, forward 1+2 and 2-2 are generally your approach tools. 2-2 in particular is useful for some mental frame advantage due to its extensions, despite being -9. Since down back 3 and down back 4 have pretty short range, your main lows when you aren't too close should be down 2, full crouch down forward 2, and to a lesser extent, down back 2. Though obviously this is quite risky due to its slow speed, linearity, and being launch punishable on block. Up close, Noctis swaps his gameplay to becoming a very poke heavy character, with moves like his jab, down forward 1, down forward 4, and lows like down back 3. He becomes even stronger up close at the wall due to his very threatening up close mix-ups with moves like Demo Man and forward 1+2. Unfortunately, this also means that Noctis has to take big risks to get decent damage, as Demo Man is launch punishable on block, while forward 1+2 is -9, which leaves Noctis himself open to the opponent's mix-ups. Noctis' pressure starts to shine once he's able to push the opponent to the wall. With nowhere to run, Noctis can use many of his wall splatting mids to enforce his pressure. Demo Man also becomes much stronger since it can no longer be backdash out of, and at certain angles can even give a free wall combo. This is also where Noctis' full crouch pressure is at its strongest, as full crouch down forward 1 is an incredibly strong mid that wall splats and is safe, while full crouch down forward 2 is a dangerous low that gives him plus frames while making follow-ups hard to sidestep or backdash out of thanks to the wall. Many of Noctis' moves can be stepped very easily. At close range, most of his key moves are stepped to the right, like his down forward 1. At longer ranges, his long range tools should generally be stepped to the left instead. Because of this, many players tend to try to move around Noctis first to avoid his hard-hitting moves, like down back 1+2 or while running 1+2. Thankfully, he also boasts the previously mentioned forward 1+2, which is one of the best homing moves in the game, thus making this his go-to approach and homing tool. Once the opponent has been conditioned to sit still in fear of forward 1+2 or up forward 4, then he can begin to threaten again with his linear moves like down back 1+2 for space control or while running 1+2 for pressure. Make sure to constantly switch up and adapt to which moves you use, depending on what you think your opponent's movement tendencies are. Noctis generally struggles to make comebacks since he lacks very good power lows. Down back 2 as mentioned is very risky, and Demo Man has very poor range. As such, your goal with Noctis should be to try to poke and annoy your opponent to get the life lead, capitalize as hard as possible you can with punishment, then try to maintain that life lead by making the opponent afraid to come in with his long range tools like down back 1+2 or warp strike. Or simply revert to a safe, compact poking style again to lock them down. Noctis also happens to have very strong Okizeme and very threatening setups. So for the purposes of this section, we will try to cover the most popular situations where Noctis can enforce his setups. Noctis' forward 4 is notorious for having very strong mix-ups afterwards, so here are the options to use against your opponent. If the opponent wakes up immediately, regardless if they tap up or hold back to wake up, an immediate down forward 2 will launch them for a full combo. If they had tapped up to wake up, you will need to do a back turn combo instead of the regular staples. This setup will only work on normal sized characters however, as the down forward 2 will whiff on smaller hitbox characters like most females, with the exception being when this is done at the wall. The alternative here is to do a forward 1+2, which will work on all characters, albeit being far less rewarding. If the opponent stays on the ground or tech rolls, they will be able to punish you with a get up kick. If the opponent chooses to stay on the ground, a down back 1+2 will refloat them for a float combo. If the opponent holds back immediately, they will simply block the move, and if they tech roll, they will not get refloated, though one hit of the string will connect regardless of which way they roll towards. If the opponent tries to tech roll, intentionally whiffing a down forward 1 into a down forward 2 will also relaunch them. Do note that the down back 1+2 refloat doesn't work on big characters like Jack or Gigas. In those situations, you'll have to resort to less rewarding options. If they stay on the ground, you can simply use a ground hitting move like down back 2. Also, experienced players will know how to deal with this mix-up simply by varying their wake-up timing. So in those situations, it might actually be better to simply go for the Okizeme pressure rather than the mix-up. Off of a back turn screw, a deep dash down back 1 will then lead into the exact same options. However, if you do the roll dodge transition from down back 1, he has a few different options. Down back 1 into roll dodge 1 will catch opponents who wake up immediately. This is primarily useful when the opponent is close to the wall, as this will give a wall bounce for huge damage. Roll dodge into a down back 1+2 will simply refloat opponents who stay on the ground, no different than before. To catch tech rolling, roll dodge into full crouch down forward 2 is the way to go. As pretty much all of these options are less rewarding, with perhaps the exception of roll dodge 1, this should only be used if you're ending the combo close to a wall. Otherwise, simply ending with down back 1 and using the previously mentioned options after forward 4 or using a different combo ender should be the way to go. There are many variations of Noctis' backturn Okizeme, so there will be links to both a video from Bolt's Twitter as well as the Noctis Discord server, where there are many more options covered that aren't in this video. Please check the description to see more. Finally, on to wall Okizeme. Typically, the wall combo you should go with is down forward 4-2 into down back 1+2, since it offers respectable damage and gives the best Okizeme. After this wall combo on axis, if you think the opponent will tech roll, try to make a small sidestep right before enforcing your mix-up. This way, forward 1+2 will be at the right distance from the wall to cause a wall splat, and the first two hits of Demo Man are far more likely to cause a resplat for another wall combo as well. If you think the opponent will try to wake up immediately, or stay on the ground to not eat the mix-up, you can do a ground hitting move like down 1 or down back 3 which will hit them, and then from there enforce your full crouch mix-up. If you do not wish to go for either of these options, you can simply enforce your full crouch mix-ups right away with either a full crouch down forward 1 for a safe wall splat, or full crouch down forward 2 for plus frames, since this is fairly low risk and still quite rewarding compared to the previous options. Overall, Noctis is considered one of the more average characters on the roster. While he has high combo damage and fantastic range, he also lacks certain other traits that make the other characters top tier. He doesn't have particularly good approach tools, and most of his moves leave him at a sizable disadvantage on block as well, making him hard to both pressure with and susceptible to pressure, the latter of which is especially evident due to his lack of good panic moves and certain generics like generic down 4 or a down jab. Despite this, Noctis is one of the easiest characters on the roster to pick up, and his explosive nature makes him extremely well suited to more patient defensive players, which is bolstered even further by his well-rounded punishment, huge range, and unique parry setups. Noctis might have a hard time getting in, but all it takes is one slip up from the opponent for the momentum to shift in his favor, and then it's game over.